My name is Ben Connor, and I'm a second-year medical student. So to me, in an active learning session, what makes it most valuable, I think there are two factors in that. One is sort of the amount of instruction that we're receiving during the active learning session, and two is sort of the relevance of the material to our board exams. And I think that I'm sort of echoing a lot of the thoughts of my peers and my classmates, in that when we go to an active learning session, typically we've already reviewed the lecture material, or at least the hope is that we have, and we want the active learning session to be something that reinforces that material, and also something where we can sort of see the relevance of that material to our Step 1 exam. And so I was sort of brainstorming and trying to think of active learning sessions where I thought they were really valuable. And I thought back to our first year when we had the Maricopa radiology residents come and instruct us. And something that I thought was really great about that session is that there was an instructor for each table during that TBL. And because of that, it sort of separated itself from a typical lecture where there's one person walking around and sort of doing all of the talking, because you can't split that one person amongst all of the tables. So by having an instructor at each table where we can get separate instruction, they sort of keep us on task, and we know we have someone to refer to the entire time. I thought that was really valuable. Now, I know it's not realistic to have an instructor for each table at every TBL, but something I was thinking that might be beneficial is to have upperclassmen be part of those TBLs, whether that's a second year helping out at a first year TBL or a third or fourth year helping out at a second year TBL. It could be valuable for those upperclassmen because it could be review for them for that material, and then for the students that are participating in the TBL, they have their own separate instruction and somebody guiding them through so that they're working in small groups. And I also think it offers more of an opportunity to ask questions and get involved. I think a lot of students, when there's just one instructor and they feel like their classmates might be kind of held up if they ask a question, are reluctant to raise their hand and participate in the TBLs. You can kind of see that happening during the TBLs when the instructor's walking around with a microphone and nobody's raising their hand, and it's difficult to get someone to volunteer. You know, our CBIs are broken up into small groups and we have instructors for each one, and that's really beneficial. I feel like I participate a lot more in CBI than I do in a TBL because of that. So I think that is valuable. And then making it relevant to our Step 1 exams. So I think the statistics have come out where they've seen that people who do more QBank questions tend to do better on their Step 1 board exam. I think it would be best to utilize TBLs to incorporate those QBank exam questions where we have instructors who are experts in this material. We can go through those questions with them, and it can be sort of relevant to lecture material at the same time, because in theory, lecture material is what's going to be on Step 1. One way to sort of convince students that this is the case, I think, is when they're on 145 and they're seeing what TBL is scheduled. Even in parentheses, when you're listing the TBL, put in the first aid pages that will be tested, or that will be covered that day. So you have a TBL scheduled, say it's on embryology, first aid pages 3 to 13, so that one, they can look over those first aid pages, and two, it's proof for them ahead of time that what they're going to be doing that day is going to be immediately relevant to their step preparation, which is important to all of us. So I think the combination of having smaller groups with instructors for each group, whether that's an actual instructor, residents, or upper class medical students, and then making it as relevant to Step 1 and sort of focusing on practice questions with good explanations where each small group is working through them. I think active learning sessions are less valuable when they're essentially a lecture with different seating arrangements, which I think sometimes that can happen. And I know it's actually probably pretty difficult to avoid that, but for our block right now, our TBLs are actually in the lecture hall. They're not even in the small groups with the small tables. And I think that kind of speaks to where the TBLs can sort of get to, where it ends up just being an additional lecture. Avoiding the model of lecture when doing a TBL as much as possible, I think, is the best way to go about it. I think another thing that makes TBLs less valuable is when they introduce new material. I just don't think that's a good idea because the goal is to teach it in a different format than lecture, and because of that, if it's new material, it may not really be getting across to us the way it should and the way it typically would in lecture. I think the TBLs should be, and the active learning sessions should be dedicated to reinforcing material as opposed to introducing new material. Another thing that I had been thinking about that has helped in the past with active learning sessions is to make them fun. So an example I can think of is in the pulmonary block, the PRAB block with Dr. Grimaldi. She had an active learning session where we were actually broken into teams. And she did a great job because the active learning session was dedicated to practice questions that we would see similar sort of types of questions on the exam. And we were broken up into teams, and it was a poll everywhere. Teams discussed amongst themselves. They went through the question and came up with their answer and submitted it to poll everywhere. And then she would reveal the answer and the explanation, and depending on whether or not you got the question right, you got a point for your team. At the end, she added up all the points, and then the winner got prizes, which were snacks. She's in pediatrics, so it's hard for her to not give out snacks to people. So I think making it fun and sort of a challenge where there's competition and you get to work together with your classmates, I think that's something else that makes active learning sessions valuable.